As you prepare for the reading comprehension section in your exam, perhaps the most important step is to develop a good reading strategy. And to understand what you should do as you read your passages, let's first talk about what you should not do. When we talked about critical reasoning questions, we frequently said that it's a good idea to read the question first before you read the passage. That way you have an idea of what kind of details you should be paying attention to as you read. This strategy does not work with the reading comprehension section. The reason is that in critical reasoning we had one short passage and one question. In reading comprehension we have a much longer passage followed by 5 or 6 questions. If you read 5 or 6 questions first and then attempt to read the passage, mentally you'll be juggling way too much information, and you won't be able to focus on the passage. Instead, when you read the passage, you want to read it like you're watching your favorite movie. You want to think about the passage and nothing else. Don't think about time, don't think about past questions, don't think about what kind of questions they might ask you. You simply want to think about the passage and nothing else. Another piece of bad advice is to treat the passage like a game of Where's Waldo, meaning you will lightly skim the passage and then read the questions, knowing full well that you will go back to the passage and look for the details you missed the first time. The problem with this approach is that the passages are incredibly dense and incredibly tricky. And there are several portions that can be easily misinterpreted if you don't read them carefully. And the questions they ask you will attempt to exploit this misunderstanding. Students will do the worst on a particular passage, not when they don't understand the passage, but when they actually misunderstand the passage, meaning they read too quickly, they thought they knew the passage, but really they understood it completely wrong. Most of the skimming techniques are written about and taught by people who have extremely high IQs. And if you have an extremely high IQ, that technique could work. But for virtually every student we've ever worked with, skimming is not a good idea. In other words, if you felt the need to watch a video on how to read a passage, you're probably not smart enough to skim. By far, the single most common and detrimental mistake that students make is to read straight through the passage. Meaning that when they get lost or they feel like they don't fully understand the passage, they simply keep on going. Which really doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you ever got lost while you were driving, you wouldn't simply keep on driving in an unknown direction hoping that you would become unlost. But students do this with reading passages all the time, and they reason that, well, if I don't understand now, that hopefully by the time I get to the end of the passage I'll have more information and that will help me understand the beginning of the passage. But these passages are not mystery novels. There are no surprise endings. Typically, if you feel yourself getting lost or confused in the beginning, it's only going to get worse as you go deeper into the passage. Which brings us to how you actually want to read the passage. Your primary goal when you read the passage is to understand the passage, which means that the instant you feel yourself getting lost, you need to stop immediately and go back. Students frequently ask, well, how far do I have to go back in the passage? And if you have to go back more than 1 or 2 sentences, then you were not paying close enough attention to your level of understanding. In a given passage, it's not unusual for a typical student to have to reread about 1/3 or 1/4 of the passage. Typically, when I'm reading a passage, I find myself reading part of the first paragraph twice, a little bit in the second paragraph, maybe something in the third paragraph, and once I get to about the third paragraph, then I have a pretty good basis for what the passage is talking about. So from that point, I might only be rereading 1 or 2 sentences in every other paragraph. And I frequently like to read the very last sentence twice because that's often where the author sums up his or her final position. As you attempt to read to understand the passages, one of your biggest challenges is the fact that the passages are actually quite boring. And within one exam, you're going to have a wide range of topics from literature to art and history to science. And they have a wide range of topics because the test makers need to guarantee that almost every student has one or more passage that they find incredibly boring. So we have to find a way to engage ourselves in something that we would otherwise have no interest in. One of these techniques is to actually read out loud. Now, you can't read out loud like I'm talking now, but you can at least lightly mumble. And most exam testing centers will give you headphones or earplugs. And when they do, if you lightly whisper or mumble to yourself, your own voice is louder in your head. When your mouth is moving and your tongue is articulating, it's much more difficult for your mind to wander. There are other mental tricks you can use, such as pretending to read to someone else. Most people are much more engaged in a story when they are the one telling the story. People, in general, like to talk a whole lot more than we like to listen. So I used to visualize myself reading my passages to a group of 5-year-olds. Or I would pretend I was rehearsing, preparing to give a speech. Sometimes I would even nod my head slightly or use hand gestures just as if I were actually giving a speech. Now, you can't be too obnoxious because they will kick you out of the exam, but you can do subtle body movements just to keep your physical body engaged in the process. The more energy you put into delivering a good read, the easier you will find it to actually pay attention to the passage. Some exams will let you highlight or take notes, and these techniques can be helpful, but they must be used with a sense of caution. First, let's talk about highlighting. What you don't want to do is highlight as you read the passage the first time, because one, it's very expensive in terms of time. It slows you down a lot, often too much. But two, when you highlight the first time you read something, you're making a tremendous gamble. You're assuming that the parts you highlighted will actually be used to answer a question. And the problem you'll find is that if you highlight parts of a passage and then don't highlight other parts of the passage, if you read a question and then have to go back to the passage, your eyes will have a very difficult time looking at the part of the passage that is not highlighted. In other words, highlighting in this way is only helpful if you know what parts of the passage will be used to answer the questions, and you simply will not know that the first time you read the passage. Instead, if you choose to highlight, you want to highlight after you've read an entire paragraph, and then go back and highlight the 2 or 3 words that sum up the main point inside that paragraph. When you highlight in this way, you are acknowledging that highlighting itself does not help. Instead, it's a bit of a gimmick. It's an excuse to stop and take a moment to reflect on what you've just read, and then to sum up what you think the author's main point was. If you decide to take notes as you read the passage, the same philosophy applies. The notes themselves will not help you. You will not have time nor the foresight to make good comprehensive notes. Instead, the notes are simply an excuse to stop and digest what you've just read. Consequently, your notes should be very short, almost illegible. They can be simple scribbles, smiley faces, little arrows. It doesn't matter. Again, you will not go back to your notes, but taking the time to make the notes and to think about what the author is trying to convey, that process can be extremely beneficial. Let's talk about time. Time is the enemy. Time can hurt your exam in 2 basic ways. One, if you feel rushed, you are naturally going to make more mistakes. But 2, the mere act of worrying about time is an enormous distraction. Most of our students initially think about time way too much. And the end result is they can't focus very well on the passages they're reading. Think about it this way. If you were taking your exam and every minute I walked by and whispered in your ear, "Oh, you're not going fast enough. You better hurry. You're not going to make it." How many times would I have to whisper in your ear before you turned around and punched me? That may seem like a ridiculous example, but so many of our students do the exact same thing with themselves in their head. As they're reading, as they're taking questions, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I'm not going fast enough, I'm not going to make it. Which means they're less focused, less efficient, and less accurate on the test as a whole. All of that being said, there are ways that you can actually increase your reading speed. Most people who read slow do so because they read in the exact same way they talk, meaning they pronounce every single word as they read in their head. But the reality is you can read a whole lot faster than you can talk. For example, if I asked you, what is this symbol? You will probably quickly recognize that as a swastika, or the symbol in Nazi Germany. Now, swastika is not an easy word to say or pronounce, and you knew this symbol probably instantly. So you recognized it a whole lot faster than you could pronounce the 3 syllables swastika. The same is true for every other word in the English language. You recognize words faster than you can say them. So the trick to reading quickly is to look at words and recognize words without pronouncing them fully in your head. Most speed readers, or people who read quickly, usually only pronounce about every 3rd word as they read. So if I'm reading this passage, I might only pronounce quarter, people, 17th, France, first year, and so on. And you can try this. Try reading this in your head, taking the time to read only the yellow highlighted portions. Look at every word. Look at a and of the and born in and century. But these words are so incredibly common that your brain is going to quickly recognize these before you have a chance to read them out loud. So you can just read the yellow portion, look at the blue portion, and still fully grasp the sentence. Now, this technique may come very naturally to you. And if it does, great. Or if you have a long time to prepare for your exam, fantastic. But if your exam is coming up very soon and or you have a hard time learning to speed read, don't push yourself in the exam. Read the way that you're most comfortable and don't worry about time. Speed reading is a technique that can be developed. It may take a little while, but once you get it, it will help you in your life. The question is whether or not you can get good at it quickly enough to help you in your exam. Even if you don't have time to learn to speed read before your exam, you can still employ a lot of the same techniques we've talked about today. Specifically, practice not mentally juggling, meaning that when you're reading the passage, don't think about time, don't think about the questions. Instead, read the passage fully engaged like you're watching your favorite movie. If you feel yourself getting lost or you're confused about something in the passage, stop immediately and go back. The primary goal when you read the passage is to understand the passage. Our basic philosophy is read slower if you have to. Take your time on the reading, and the other videos will show you how to go fast on the questions.